Škoda had more PR column inches than they'd had in the previous 26 years of rallying. It was a massive thing for them. By the time, there was complete carnage, I remember, on the first day. Even Seb Loeb fell foul to the conditions and crashed out. They were tracks made through the bush, so you could have trees right on the edge of the road. So if you slide too far on this slippery surface and you could whack a wheel straight off the car and that's you finished. It was almost an event made for Colin in many ways, willing to take that little extra edge, and we were second overall. Now, this was the best result they'd ever had, or potential result.
Joining me today is the one and only Nicky Grist, and joining us also is our friend Dumbo, but we'll get onto him later. Nicky, as you may know, is probably the most famous co-driver in the world and the voice of Colin McRae Rally, so even people who haven't seen him have probably heard him at some point. How many Colin McRae Rally games have been sold throughout the world?
I reckon millions and millions.
Yeah, it's got to be millions.
Yeah, I think the first edition that came out, which was more or less, the first edition was a basic one, but that went sky high, and then whoosh, the whole thing took off after that, and we must have done 4 or 5, and then we start thinking about dirt games after that.
So if you don't know what we're talking about, maybe this will help. Come on, Nick, give us some pace notes.
Long 6 left, opens over crest, 50, care, 3 left minus, tightens over narrow bridge, and so on and so forth. And that's basically me reading the pace notes for Colin McRae game, which over time changed and we got more in depth. And the game improved because the detail became so much better. And I actually spent, 3-4 weeks up at Codemasters up at here. Where was it? Leamington Spa. Yeah. And basically used to spend weeks and weeks there doing all of this stuff. So it was an interesting part of my career that, to get involved in anyway. But, certainly the game was a big thing for Colin. And at the end of the day, it was great in Europe. It was great in the UK. But Codemasters had a problem in the US because nobody knew who Colin McRae was. And they thought he was some fictitious character. And of course,
Lara Croft or like a...
Yeah. And, they didn't know who Colin McRae was. So then they had to think of something different. But one thing that did make the difference when Colin burst on the scene in America was when we went to do X Games.
I remember it well.
Yeah, and we had a gold Subaru sponsored by No Fear. Quite apt for Colin McRae.
Very, very apt.
Yeah. And, we had to use some pace notes which were issued by a championship coordinator at that time. They weren't allowed to make their own pace notes. So that was quite difficult for Colin, because when you're used to your own system, you can drive absolutely to the max on those. These other notes we didn't know much about, and we were up against people like Travis Pastrana, and the late Ken Block was there. And after the first day of rallying north of Los Angeles, we managed to pull back some time, but we were something like second by about 5 seconds from Travis Pastrana or something. And we ended up in the Home Depot Stadium, which was converted for all the motorbike freestylists, moguls, and everything else in the middle of it. And they'd made this rally track starting down in the football pitch, and they took a load of seating up this ramp, out into the car parks outside, over this jump, back over this big jump. So off we set, and we were in this big ding-dong battle now with Travis Pastrana. And there was the jump I talk about. You came down into the stadium, and they'd built a ramp up and a ramp down with this great big void in the middle of it. So you were committed, you had to jump. And off this jump, we had to turn hairpin right tight, and then through these moguls and through to the finish. And we were finishing on the other side of the stadium. So we had some split boards telling us that we'd taken all this time out of Travis Pastrana, and we were actually up on him. So here we were on the verge of winning the rally section of X Games. And so we're coming through the car park, over the jump, down into the stadium. We come to this now jump with the void. So Colin thought, right, I'll get the exit of this jump really tight. So he just gave the steering wheel a bit of a tug, just so when it took off, it just took off at an angle. So when it landed, then he could turn tight hairpin right and gain 1 or 2 seconds off the jump. The problem was the attitude on the car was just a little too much, and we landed, and it landed heavily on the front left wheel. We bounced, dug in, and next minute the car started to roll. And I thought, okay, it's not too bad. We had enough momentum. We're going to finish back on the wheels. Soon as I thought that, next minute, chunk! Colin thought the same. He held the foot flat out on the throttle, put it in first gear. Soon as we'd hit the deck, bang, in the dust. This Subaru appears out of the dust, and we're off again. And we dragged it round the last couple of corners with a front left puncture, and we lost by a second, I think.
Wow.
But it made national news on 2 channels. And from that point on, Colin McRae was a real person in the US.
Amazing. Now, Colin was the most famous, the bravest rally driver of them all, but he had the advantage of having a steering wheel and knowing what was coming. So you could argue that you were even braver because you were sat alongside him.
Well, you wouldn't be the first to say that. But, you know, although he was a very brave driver, it wasn't going round every corner on the door handles and, my God, that's one corner. Oh, shit, here's the next one. It was nothing like that at all. I think there was certain sections, certain places where people would perhaps back off, where Colin would just be that little braver. And, you know, he had tremendous car control. I think you've got to say that about Colin. What he could do with the car, how he could position it through sideways, through a gate, at speed on gravel, was remarkable. So I had every confidence in what he could do. And of course, he had to rely on me because what I'm telling him is exactly what he's doing. So it was very much a two-way street, and we had to work together very closely to achieve what we did. And with Colin, yeah, there was always the occasional accident, but I'd had accidents with other good drivers, and, you know, but Colin certainly had the ability of turning it on and just getting an extra few seconds when everybody else was on their limit.
Now, people would basically chop their arms off to be in a position to experience what you have experienced. Can you, I know it's a hard question, but can you paint a picture with words? What was it like sitting alongside Colin McRae when he was fully committed?
I'm probably not the right person to answer that, because for me it was normal. And when I started my career, and every step I took was somebody who was quicker and better ability. So every step I took was a gradual thing. And I got to a point where before Colin, I was with Malcolm Wilson, German driver, Armin Schwarz, and then Juha Kankkunen, who was a 4-time world champion. So by the time I got to Colin, traveling at speed was normal for me. But the one thing, you know, I found more than anything else with Colin was the tremendous following that he had. And it didn't matter where you were in the world, you'd always see people waving a Scottish flag, you know, and it was remarkable. It could be Africa, it could be South America, Argentina, or Australia, New Zealand. You know, the people loved Colin McRae because I think it was the do or die attitude, the highest on the jump, the furthest in the jumps, the most sideways, because he had a very flamboyant driving style where he'd always be very sideways in, but he'd be very straight out of the corner generally. So people loved this spectacle of this rally driver throwing a car around on gravel like that, and people loved him for it. And I think if he hadn't have won a world championship, I don't think it would have made a difference to a lot of his fans, because he was him. And from my point of view, I was delighted to sit with him. But there were times he made me think once or twice, I have to say, especially on some of these big jumps and tricky sections. But his ability got him through more often than not. And, you know, and his ability probably saved us quite a number of big accidents, to be honest. I mean, he was very, very talented.
Speaking of talent, I think we all know maybe what it takes to be a talented driver. What does it take to become a talented co-driver. How do you manage, for example, those moments you're talking of, to maintain your composure, to keep on reading the notes in situations that would have a lot of people crying and running for their mummies?
Yeah. Well, no, it would be like that. And a lot of people, if you travel, got car sickness and you wouldn't even entertain it in the first place. But to be honest, the fear factor for a lot of people would stop them from doing their job. And I think that you have to be very dedicated to what you do. You have to have a very good level of concentration, because you must shut out everything that's going on around you. Colin is the one that, as you say, has got the steering wheel. He's pressing the pedals and choosing the gear he wants. You're feeding him the information he needs to keep him on the track, and that's all you have to focus on. If you start thinking about what he's doing, you don't do well what you're doing, which is a vital part of it all. And in the end, that could cause an accident as well. So good level of concentration, attention to detail in what you do, because there's a lot of elements of the co-driver, specific timing jobs, navigation on road sections, making sure you're staying on the right road, because you can be penalized if you venture off that route. But then for the driver, the key thing is delivering these pace notes just at the right time. So he's getting the information to take it in, make the decision, do what gear he needs to take, and the whole thing just flows. And, I found that, my demeanor, my level of concentration kept me away from thinking, what's he doing? God, is he going to get round this corner? Oh shit, there's another corner coming. You'd never be able to get that perfection of reading the pace note just when he needs it to make the optimum stage time.
There is another aspect which I've always found fascinating, which is the psychological one. As a driver and co-driver, it's an incredibly intense relationship. Yourself and Colin probably spent more time together during a season than he did with your wives. And as a co-driver, you have to, I guess, understand your driver, motivate him, pick him up when he's down, rein him in when he's going over the top. And there'll inevitably be moments of tension as well, which you have to weather and work through together. How did you sort of manage to sort of navigate the psychological aspect of your role to get the best out of him and ensure that any situations, whoever's fault it was, were managed to their best ability?
Yeah. There's a time and a place for everything. And I think when you're in the competition, it's all about the competition. And if there is any friction, let's get through today. What's happened is happened. We can't do anything about it. Let's concentrate and let's make sure that we do the rest of the day to the best of our ability. And I think you've got to take those feelings away from that moment and make sure you can carry on performing to your optimum, really. There are times where relationships break down, as it would in any other marriage. And, I went through that with Colin too. But I mean, he was very motivated to win championships. And sometimes that pressure of winning can overtake you a little bit. And, arguably you can make decisions that you later regret, which perhaps were the wrong decisions. But, drivers generally tend to make these decisions. Teams will go along with them about relationships and how it works with a co-driver. But normally it's always the co-driver fault anyway when things go wrong. You're always the first to be blamed when something does go wrong, but you're always the last to be congratulated when everything goes perfectly. But that was the role of a co-driver. And really, when you think about it, albeit it's a life and death situation we could very easily be in a rally car, the relationship is very much like the golfer and the caddy. Everybody knows who the golfer is, but they don't know who the caddy is. But he has such an input into controlling emotions, controlling what the golfer does. And in this case, it's the same with the co-driver in a rally car.
It's a very selfless role in many ways, isn't it? Because you take the same or arguably more of the risks because, again, I think drivers tend to know accidents are happening a bit sooner. But with sort of less of the glory, less of the money, less of the everything, and yet you have to sort of keep on coming back and performing at your best.
Yes, you do. But that's just a part of it, I suppose. I mean, yeah, we're not pressing the pedals and turning the steering wheel, but in some way you are controlling the speed as well. So, the role is quite vital, really, in the partnership. And if a driver had to drive off-site, for instance, he'd probably lose 25% of his overall speed. So it's quite dramatic. And yeah, it's a shame that co-drivers don't get more, perhaps, PR. I was lucky because Colin didn't necessarily like dealing with the press very much, so they needed to speak to somebody, and I did a lot of sort of TV interviews and what have you. So it was different for me. But the other side, we don't get pulled from pillar to post to go and do this PR, and you've got to go here to promote this and there to do that. Normally for us, when the rallying was done and when the testing was done, we could go home, relax, do what we want, have a game of golf, whatever it may be, is your passion, and then all we've got to do is turn up at the next event and off we go again.
Now, you have tried your hand on the other side of the car as well, haven't you?
I have, yeah. Not to necessarily great extent. When you sit with these fantastic drivers that I've sat with, they make it look so easy.
And it's not.
It's not at all. They make it look so easy. I've been lucky enough to have sat with two of the most naturally talented drivers the world has ever seen, in Juha Kankkunen and Colin McRae. I think from the outside it looks, wow, that's crazy. But inside it's almost just slow motion. The car is already set up for a corner. It's just naturally turning itself without any great heavy movements and hard work from inside the car. Everything just seems like slow motion. But when you try and do it yourself, you try and think too much about it, and it's not easy driving. It really isn't. And these top line cars are made to be driven fast. If you try and drive a top flight rally car that's set up for somebody like Colin McRae yourself in a forest, you then start upsetting the balance of the car, and the car becomes a complete pig to drive because it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And I can understand that, having driven myself a little bit. And I've got my own rally car. I've got an ex-factory Toyota, only because I won my first batch of World Championship rallies with that car, and it's very memorable to me. So I wanted to have that car. But yeah, it's not easy. But I do like to go out, just have a dabble. I don't want to go and compete in a rally where it's to the clock. I love doing these events where the car is the star and it's not about the driver going fast. And those kind of events are great because it's just like-minded people wanting to see these old cars of yesteryear, the sound, the smell of them. And, I enjoy that quite a bit now, actually, more than sat in the passenger seat, I have to admit.
Now, you mentioned your first clutch of wins in a Toyota. That brings us on neatly to this rather charming little artefact.
I'm actually saddened to bring this to you today. You can see that. The first ever World Championship rally I won was with a chap called Juha Kankkunen. His co-driver, unfortunately, had a brain hemorrhage in Argentina, and they needed a replacement. Juha wanted me, so I flew overnight, arrived there, did a recce, started the rally, led the first stage right the way to the end, and I won a trophy which was 3 foot tall, at least, almost as tall as me. That wouldn't take a lot of doing. But then we won Australia as well, and then we came to the home round of the world, our home round of the World Championship. That year it was sponsored by Network Q RAC Rally. So of course you always want to win your rally, and it was a difficult event. It was cold, snow, ice throughout the whole event, and it was really tricky. And we had a battle with Colin up until we got just into the borders of Scotland. He went off and crashed. But we got through and managed to win my home round of the World Championship. And this is the trophy that I've got. Now, you compare just these two, and there's no difference. I mean, you're proud of that. This one I tuck away at the back of of my cupboard. I mean, it's awful. And you wouldn't know what it is unless you read the very, very small print here on the left. I mean, it's such a shame. But as far as the record sheets show, Nicky Grist and Newark Ankelen won that rally. So that doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't wish to be rude about Network Q or the rally, but I'm sure the winner of the local darts tournament in my pub has got a bigger trophy than that.
I think it wouldn't take a lot of doing, would it? It wouldn't take a lot of doing. But never mind. We've won a lot of rallies anyway through my career. I was lucky enough to have sat with some brilliant drivers, all the best teams. Had a wonderful career and picking up 21 World Championship victories along the way. I'm happy with my lot.
Absolutely. Now, having had that adrenaline-filled life, what was it like to step away from it and just join the band of us civilians? How do you cope? 1 minute you're travelling around the world, winning rallies, and the next minute you're sitting here talking here with me. I mean, that's a come down.
Well, we're quite a few years later. It did take me a few years before I came down to where you were.
True. Fair point, well made.
But I did get involved in TV, actually. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough, although I finished, I went to almost straight away to work with an American channel, Speed Television, in the US that show NASCAR and various other motorsport. And they wanted me to cover the rally and do reports for them of the World Rally Championship. And so I kind of stayed in amongst everybody, the teams, the celebrities, all the mechanics, everybody. So my life didn't change for 2 years. So although I wasn't at the sharp end, I could enjoy it from behind the scenes. And by the time I'd done that, I think I was ready to kind of pull out altogether, which I did, up until a point where we had an opportunity to go with Colin again and Skoda. And we came back and did 2 events with Škoda, and we did an opportunity with Citroën when Seb Loeb broke his collarbone, I think, or his shoulder. And and then shortly after that, Colin died, and that was the end of it all, unfortunately.
Let's talk about your comeback, let's say, with Škoda. That was so close to being one of the most incredible comebacks that anyone has ever seen. To put it into context, I don't think Škoda had come at a time really anywhere close to getting the sort of result that they could have done in Australia. You were on course for the podium. Second was on the cards, and what happened? Just remind us if it's not too painful.
No, well, to be honest, it was a very sad time. And what happened, and the people around us in the team, that saddened me all the more. We came to do Rally GB, and that was always difficult coming back after 2 years off to get into the swing of things. We had a good test, and, we had a half reasonable result. But the press officer said in that one event, that one Rally GB, Škoda had more PR column inches than they'd had in the previous 26 years of rallying. It was a massive thing for them. And then after that, we had one more rally to go, which was Rally Australia. Now,
that was the one I remember. That was incredible.
That was the one. That was the turning point. Now, Rally Australia, to give you some idea, is very tricky. We were in the western side of Australia, and we had this round ball bearing gravel, and it really was round, and the surface was very tricky, but you weren't using necessarily proper roads. They were tracks made through the bush, so you could have trees right on the edge of the road. So if you slide too far on this slippery surface, and you could whack a wheel straight off the car, and that's you finished. So it was almost an event made for Colin in many ways, willing to take that little extra edge. And by the time, there was complete carnage, I remember, on the first day. Even Seb Loeb fell foul to the conditions and crashed out. And, we ended up the first day, and we were sort of right up there, top 5. And the star driver at Škoda at that time was Armin Schwarz. And then we went through the second day, and we ended up on the second day, we were second overall. Well, you could imagine the team were just elated. Now, the A team was Armin over there, and the B team was us over here with our mechanics. and junior engineer and what have you, and we were second overall. Now, this was the best result they'd ever had, or potential result. And we went into the last day all full of beans and everything else. The guy serviced it, and we went to the hotel at night and just had a beer in the bar and went to bed and slept and woke up the next morning, and off we went. And we did the first, there was basically 2 stages twice, but they were quite long. And we did the first loop, and we'd lost a bit of time to the car behind who overtook us. But we knew that the tyres we were on, I think we were on, I can't remember what tyres we were on, but we knew that we'd lose time in the morning on the dirty roads, but we knew our tyre was much better in the afternoon on the cleaner roads because it's all been swept clear. So we were in having a cup of coffee, our wives were with us and all the rest of it, and the engineer came and tapped me on the shoulder. Nick, can you go to the time control, please? Go to the time control. So, right, there's a technical issue with the car, that means. I said, what's wrong? He said, well, we're not sure at the moment, but we need you. It's probably going to be last minute. So I took my time card.
So normally you'd sit in the car and you'd drive there.
We just drive to the control
so that
and check
means
it on time.
That if someone's saying that, it means
it's a last minute thing.
Panic,
it's going to be a last minute checkout. Now, bearing in mind, every minute late means a 10-second penalty. 15 minutes late and you're over the time limit, you're out. So I walk to the time control, and then next minute, here comes a TV crew. So I'm there on the watch. The cars have checked out. The service park is now empty because it's reverse seating. All the other crews had gone. So I'm looking at my watch. Right, we're 1 minute late. We're 2 minutes late. We're 3 minutes late. No, I can't do anything. The guys are trying to interview me, and I just said,
you don't know what's happening.
I don't know what's going on here. Yeah. You're in the wrong place. It's all happening down there. And as it was 15 minutes and 59 seconds was the cutoff. 16 minutes plus, that's it. I can walk. So I just walked down to the service area. I walked the back way. When I got there, I walked through, and the whole of the service park in different teams, Mitsubishi, Peugeot, Ford, Subaru, they were all outside our service bay. And these poor mechanics what had actually happened, the junior engineer read the data, and the clutch reading was good after the second day. Armin's mechanics decided to change it in the 45-minute service because normally it doesn't last any more than 2 days. This guy chose not to do it. Now there was a panic, and it was something like a 20-minute service. There wasn't really enough time. The main mechanics were on Armin's car. They didn't take them off his car and put them onto ours. Our poor guys, who were thrust into a position of responsibility, now had to try and change this clutch. As it was, they panicked. They dropped the clutch pack. It all fell into pieces, and these things have to go together in a specific way. So then they had to go and get another clutch, and then they had to fit that, put the gearbox into place, and then they couldn't get the pin to align. They had to get the thing and line it up again and put the gearbox back in it again. So the whole thing was just a shambles. And eventually they did it. They dropped the car down on its wheels. This was about 5 minutes after I got there. And they started the car, they reversed the car, pulled it forward. And all these mechanics and all these other team members clapped these guys. They realized the importance of it. But these guys shot out the back. And I've never seen so many grown men cry, literally. And it upsets me to this day. I mean, they were throwing stuff out the back, and I was so bitterly disappointed for them that the best result Škoda could have ever had in the World Championship was frittered away. And unfortunately, I suppose, it wasn't the junior engineer's fault. It wasn't these mechanics' fault. It was a management fault. They had key people that should have been on the case, looking at what Colin was doing, making sure the car was ready for the last day. And I think it's their fault that we lost the result, and Škoda the year after pulled out.
Well, that's a devastating low. Looking back at your career, what will you remember as the biggest high? There are so many to choose from, I realise.
Oh God, there is. I think it would be unfair to pick one. I think winning my first World Championship rally was pretty special, the way that I did it in Argentina. You know, arriving last minute, just about getting round all the stages, leading from start to finish with a guy I'd never sat with before. I'll never forget that. The next was winning this bloody awful trophy. I mean, to win my first home round of the World Championship in the worst conditions we've ever had, and we've not had anything like that since. But then the last thing was getting Colin McRae through Safari Rally in 1997 to win, and to take him to lead to win 3 more safaris,
including our friend Dumbo here,
and including Dumbo, who's going to be in Pride Place at home, and I look at him every day.
Fantastic. Finally, Nick, before we leave you, there's lots of people who would love to do what you're doing. How do you do it? How did you break into the sport to get to the very top level? What advice would you give to anyone looking to do the same or looking to compete at the top level in their chosen career path?
Unfortunately, there's no shortcut to the top. I mean, it's all about being a good co-driver, having reasonable experience. But to start with, you just join your local motor club. You will be around like-minded competitors, some experienced, some not so experienced. That'll give you the opportunities to speak to other co-drivers, gain some experience, meet drivers, get the opportunity to compete after you've got your competition license, and then just do a series of small events, getting bigger and better every year, to then, in the hope of then meeting up with a proper driver, by good PR, social media, letters writing to teams, drivers, putting yourself out there, and give yourself that opportunity. There's very few of them out there now, so you have to stand out in the crowd, but get some experience first, and then be different and be good.
Advice right from the top. Thanks ever so much, Nicky. Thank you for sharing your stories, your advice, and thank you for bringing along Dumbo.
Pleasure.